Welcome to Sinister Case, the channel where we uncover America's darkest criminal cases. Imagine a handsome, charming, intelligent man, someone you would trust, someone you would go out with, someone who could be your friend, your boyfriend, maybe even your husband. Now imagine that this same person is responsible for the deaths of at least 30 young women, though the real number might be closer to 100. Today we're diving deep into the disturbing mind of Theodore Robert Bundy, the serial killer who used his charm as a deadly weapon and fooled an entire nation for years. I'm your name. And this is another sinister case that will make you question everyone you think you can trust. Ted Bundy was born on November 24, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont. But his story begins with a lie that would shape his entire twisted existence. 4. The first several years of his life, he believed his mother was actually his older sister. His paternal grandmother, Eleanor Louise Cowell, raised him as her own son, hiding the shameful truth that Louise Cowell, his supposed sister, was actually his unwed teenage mother. Louise had gotten pregnant at just 22 years old by a man who never claimed paternity. Some say it was a sailor. Others suggest it might have been her own father in an act of incest that the family desperately wanted to cover up. To avoid the crushing social scandal of the 1940s, when unmarried mothers were ostracized from society, the family created this elaborate charade that would haunt Ted for the rest of his life. But here's where the story gets even more sinister. Ted's grandfather, Samuel Cowell, wasn't just a strict disciplinarian. He was a violent, abusive man with a hair-trigger temper. Neighbors reported seeing him torture animals, and family members lived in constant fear of his explosive rage. Some biographers suggest that this toxic, violent environment may have planted the first seeds of psychopathy in young Ted's developing mind. The house was filled with secrets, lies, and violence, the perfect breeding ground for a future monster. When Ted was 4 years old, he and Louise packed up and moved across the country to Tacoma, Washington, where she hoped to start fresh. There, Louise met and married Johnny Bundy, a military cook who seemed like a decent, stable man. Johnny legally adopted Ted and gave him the surname that would become synonymous with evil, Bundy. But even in this new family, Ted never quite fit in. Johnny tried to connect with him, tried to teach him outdoor skills and sports, but Ted was different. He was withdrawn, preferred books to baseball, and even at a young age displayed an unsettling fascination with knives and violence. During his teenage years and early adulthood, Ted seemed to transform himself into the perfect American success story. He was intelligent, articulate, and devastatingly handsome. He studied psychology at the University of Washington, worked on political campaigns for the Republican Party, and even volunteered at a suicide prevention hotline. The cruel irony of a future killer counseling people in their darkest moments. Ted was particularly good with women. He knew exactly what to say, how to act, how to make them feel special and understood. He had serious relationships, including one with a woman named Elizabeth Klopfer that lasted several years. To everyone who knew him, Ted Bundy was the guy you'd want your daughter to bring home. But behind this carefully constructed facade, something dark and twisted was growing. Ted later admitted that even as a child, he felt different from other people. He didn't experience empathy the way normal people did. Instead, he learned to mimic emotions, to copy the behaviors he saw in others. He became a master manipulator, a chameleon who could become whoever he needed to be to get what he wanted. And what Ted wanted was control. Complete, absolute control over another human being. The kind of control you only get when someone is completely helpless. When they're dying. Ted Bundy's first confirmed victim was Linda Ann Healy, a 21-year-old psychology student at the University of Washington. It was the early morning hours of February 1, 1974, when Ted crept into her basement bedroom in a house she shared with other students. Linda simply vanished without a trace. Her roommates found her bed neatly made, but with blood on the pillow. and nightgown. There were no signs of struggle, no screams heard in the night. It was as if she had simply ceased to exist. But investigators would later learn that Ted had been perfecting his technique for months, maybe even years. He had been stalking women, learning their routines, figuring out when they were most vulnerable. Some experts believe he may have killed for the first time while still a teenager, practicing on hitchhikers and runaways whose disappearances wouldn't be immediately noticed. Ted developed what can only be described as a diabolical hunting strategy. He was a master of deception who understood that people's natural instinct to help others could be weaponized against them. He would pretend to be injured, arm in a cast, leg in a brace, walking on crutches, and approach attractive young women in public places like college campuses, parks, or shopping centers. His standard approach was devastatingly effective. He would struggle to carry something to his car, usually books or a sailboat, and ask a passing woman for help. Who would refuse to help an injured, well-dressed, polite young man? He looked like someone's boyfriend, someone's son. He looked safe. His weapon of choice? A beige 1968 Volkswagen Beetle that he had modified specifically for his crimes. He removed the passenger seat so he could quickly incapacitate victims and hide their bodies. He kept a tire iron, handcuffs, rope, and a ski mask in the car at all times. That innocent-looking bug became his mobile torture chamber. Ted's victims weren't random. He had a very specific type that he hunted with the precision of a predator. They were young, usually college-aged, attractive, with long brown or dark blonde hair parted in the middle. They looked remarkably similar to each other, and even more remarkably, they all resembled his first serious girlfriend, Stephanie Brooks, who had broken up with him years earlier. Some psychologists believe that every woman Ted killed was a substitute for Stephanie, that he was murdering her over and over again in a twisted form of revenge for the rejection and humiliation he felt when she left him. Between January 1974 and October 1975, young women began disappearing at an alarming rate across Washington, Oregon, Utah, and Colorado. The cases seemed unconnected at first. Different police jurisdictions, different states, different circumstances. But there was a pattern that law enforcement was slow to recognize. Donna Gail Manson, 19 years old, vanished from Evergreen State College on March 12, 1974. Susan Elaine Rancourt, 18, disappeared from Central Washington University on April 17, 1974. Kathy Devine, 15, was found murdered in Washington in December 1973, though she wouldn't be officially linked to Bundy until decades later. Roberta Kathleen Parks, 22, disappeared from Oregon State University on May 6, 1974. Brenda Carol Ball, 22, vanished from a tavern in Burien, Washington on June 1, 1974. Jorgen Hawkins, 18, disappeared from the University of Washington campus on June 11, 1974. Each disappearance sent shockwaves through local communities. Parents kept their daughters home. College campuses implemented buddy systems. But Ted was too smart, too careful, and too charming to be caught by these precautions. The first major breakthrough in the case came on July 14, 1974, at Lake Sammamish State Park near Seattle. It was a beautiful sunny day, and hundreds of people were enjoying picnics, swimming, and sunbathing. Ted decided to hunt in broad daylight in front of dozens of potential witnesses, a move that would ultimately lead to his downfall. That day, Ted approached several young women, introducing himself by his real first name and asking for help loading a sailboat onto his car. Most women declined, sensing something wasn't quite right about this overly friendly stranger. But 2 women said yes. Janice Ann Ott, 23, was sunbathing with friends when the handsome stranger with his arm in a sling approached her around 12:30 p.m. He was charming, polite, and seemed genuinely helpless. Janice told her friends she was going to help him for just a few minutes. She was never seen alive again. 4 hours later, Denise Marie Naslund, 19, was picnicking with her boyfriend and another couple. When she went to use the restroom, the same man approached her. Her friends later said she seemed hesitant, but ultimately agreed to help. She also vanished without a trace. But this time, Ted had made a critical error. Too many people had seen him, heard him give his real first name, noticed his distinctive car. The police finally had solid leads. A handsome man named Ted, driving a beige Volkswagen Beetle with his arm in a fake sling. The Lake Sammamish incident was a turning point. For the first time, police realized they were dealing with a serial killer who was bold enough to hunt in broad daylight. The FBI was called in and a massive manhunt began. Meanwhile, Ted had moved his hunting grounds to Utah, where he enrolled in law school at the University of Utah. He thought a change of location would throw off investigators, but instead, he just created a new crime spree in a different state. In Utah, Ted's killings became even more brutal and bizarre. He began taking victims to remote locations where he could spend more time with them, torturing and killing them, slowly. He also began engaging in necrophilia, returning to decomposing bodies to commit sexual acts. This wasn't just murder. This was a level of depravity that shocked even hardened investigators. Beginning. They were building murder cases against him in multiple states. While awaiting trial for murder in Colorado, Ted did something that shocked the nation and revealed just how arrogant and manipulative he truly was. He escaped from custody. Twice. The first escape happened on June 7, 1977, during a court hearing in Aspen. Ted had been granted permission to represent himself in his murder trial, which allowed him access to the law library without handcuffs or leg irons. During a recess, he simply walked to a window and jumped out, injuring his ankle, but managing to flee into the Colorado wilderness. For 6 days, Ted Bundy was loose in the mountains, and the entire region was in a state of panic. He broke into cabins, stole food and clothing, and even managed to steal a car. But his injured ankle slowed him down, and he was recaptured on June 13, 1977, while driving a stolen vehicle. Most criminals would have learned their lesson, but not Ted Bundy. He was already planning his next escape. On December 30, 1977, Ted pulled off what many consider one of the most audacious jailbreaks in American history. Over several weeks, he had been using a hacksaw blade to cut through the metal ceiling of his cell in the Garfield County Jail. On that winter night, while other inmates created distractions, Ted squeezed through the hole he had cut, crawled through the jail's ventilation system, and dropped down into the apartment of the chief jailer. The jailer wasn't home. Ted calmly walked out the front door and disappeared into the night. It would be 15 hours before anyone realized he was gone. Ted Bundy was now a fugitive with nothing left to lose. He made his way to Florida, a state with no death penalty restrictions, where he would commit his most heinous and brutal crimes yet. On January 15, 1978, just 2 weeks after his escape, Ted struck with a level of violence that horrified even experienced homicide investigators. He broke into the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University in Tallahassee around 3 a.m., when the young women were sleeping peacefully in their beds. What happened next was a frenzy of violence that lasted less than an hour but left a trail of devastation that would haunt investigators for decades. Ted first entered the room of Margaret Bowman, a 21-year-old art student. He strangled her with pantyhose and beat her so savagely with a piece of firewood that her skull was fractured. Then he moved to the room of Lisa Levy, a 20-year-old fashion merchandising student. Ted strangled Lisa, beat her, sexually assaulted her, and bit her so viciously that he left clear teeth marks on her body, evidence that would later help convict him. Ted then attacked Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner in another room. Both women survived, though they suffered severe injuries, including broken bones and permanent psychological trauma. The entire attack lasted less than an hour. By the time police arrived, Ted was long gone, but he had left behind more evidence than ever before: footprints, hair fibers, And most damning of all, bite marks on Lisa Levy's body that would prove to be as unique as a fingerprint. But Ted wasn't finished. 3 weeks later, on February 9, 1978, he committed what many consider his most heartless crime. He abducted 12-year-old Kimberly Diane Leach from her middle school in Lake City, Florida. Kimberly was just a child, walking to her classroom when Ted convinced her to come with him. For weeks, volunteers searched for Kimberly while her parents made desperate pleas on television for her safe return. But Ted had already murdered her and dumped her body in a remote state park, where it was found decomposed beyond recognition nearly 2 months later. The murder of Kimberly Leach showed that Ted had crossed every line, broken every taboo. He wasn't just killing college women anymore, he was murdering children. Ted's final capture came on February 15, 1978, in Pensacola, Florida. Officer David Lee noticed a suspicious man loitering near a restaurant and decided to check him out. When Ted saw the police car, he ran, leading to a foot chase through downtown Pensacola. When Officer Lee finally tackled Ted, he initially gave a false name. But when they ran his fingerprints, the truth came out. This was Theodore Robert Bundy, one of America's most wanted fugitives. The trials that followed were unlike anything America had ever seen. Ted chose to represent himself in court, turning the proceedings into his own personal theater. He was charming, articulate, and seemed to genuinely enjoy the attention and media circus surrounding his case. But perhaps most disturbing of all was the cult of personality that grew around Ted during his trials. Women from across the country sent him love letters, marriage proposals, and even money. Some attended his trials daily, dressing up as if they were going to see a movie star rather than a serial killer. One woman, Carol Ann Boone, actually married Ted during his trial. She had worked with him years earlier and refused to believe he was guilty. Even more shocking, she somehow managed to conceive a child with him while he was on death row, though the details of how this happened remain mysterious. The prosecution's case was built on forensic evidence that was groundbreaking for its time. The bite marks on Lisa Levy's body were photographed, measured, and compared to dental impressions taken from Ted's teeth. Expert witnesses testified that the marks were a perfect match. Ted Bundy had literally left his signature on his victim's flesh. Despite his legal training and considerable intelligence, Ted couldn't overcome the mountain of evidence against him. On July 23, 1979, he was sentenced to death for the Chi Omega murders. A second trial for the murder of Kimberly Leach resulted in another death sentence in February 1980. For nearly a decade, Ted sat on death row at Florida State Prison, filing appeal after appeal, giving interviews to psychologists and investigators, and slowly beginning to reveal the true scope of his crimes. As his execution date approached, Ted finally began to confess, but even his confessions were manipulative. He would trade information about his victims' remains for stays of execution, dangling hope in front of grieving families like a carrot on a stick. Initially, Ted admitted to 30 murders across 7 states, but investigators believed the real number was much higher, possibly over 100 victims. Ted had been killing for over a decade, traveling constantly, and he had perfected his methods to a terrifying degree. He revealed horrifying details about his crimes, how he would decapitate some victims and keep their heads as trophies in his apartment, how he would return to dump sites to have sex with decomposing bodies, how he would sometimes put makeup on his victims' corpses to make them look more lifelike. Ted also explained his psychology in chilling detail. He said he didn't see his victims as people, but as objects for his use. He felt no remorse, no guilt, no human connection to the women he tortured and killed. To him, they were simply possessions to be acquired, used, and discarded. On January 24, 1989, after exhausting all his appeals, Theodore Robert Bundy was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. Hundreds of people gathered outside the prison to celebrate, chanting "Burn, Bundy, burn," and setting off fireworks when the execution was announced. Ted's last words were a carefully crafted apology to the families of his victims, but even in death, experts questioned his sincerity. Was this genuine remorse? Or just another manipulation from a man who had spent his entire life pretending to be something he wasn't? Ted Bundy's case changed criminal investigation forever. His crimes led to advances in forensic science, improved communication between law enforcement agencies, and a better understanding of serial killer psychology. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, made famous in shows like Criminal Minds, was largely developed in response to cases like Bundy's. But perhaps most importantly, Ted Bundy taught us a terrifying lesson about the nature of evil. He showed us that monsters don't always look like monsters. They can be handsome, charming, intelligent, and successful. They can be the person sitting next to you in class, working in the next office, or living in the house next door. Ted Bundy used our most human instincts against us. Our desire to help others, our tendency to trust people who seem trustworthy, our assumption that someone who looks and acts normal must be safe. He weaponized politeness, charm, and fake vulnerability to lure his victims to their deaths. His crimes remind us that we must trust our instincts, that it's okay to be cautious, and that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who seem the most harmless. This was another case from Sinister Case, and it's one that should make us all a little more careful about who we trust. Ted Bundy proved that evil can wear any face, speak with any voice, and hide behind any smile. If you found this deep dive into one of America's most notorious killers as chilling as I did, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a new case. What other infamous serial killers would you like to see covered on Sinister Case? Leave your suggestions in the comments below. But remember, some stories are so dark they might just keep you awake at night. And always remember, not every smile hides good intentions, and not everyone who offers to help actually wants to help you. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next investigation.